cosplay world. This is going to be the first of a two-part series for Nell from Bleach and her accessories. This one is going to be her lance, and in the armory at finalcosplaycore.com, we're going to be making the mask. If you're interested in seeing that and all of the awesome content there within the armory, check out Final Cosplay Core and how to get a free 1-week trial to all the awesome content within. Have I said awesome enough? Oh, thank you for your support. At any rate, let's get on with the build. This is going to be a big, gigantic light foam lance, and so we're going to figure out how big. The trick here is just getting a simple equation going with relative knowledge of fractions. So we need the height of the person, the height of the character, and the length of the lance, and in our illustration, and then we can find the real life length. The real life length ends up being a little bit over 8 feet in total, and so as you saw from the introduction there, it breaks down, and so the two tips of the lance are detachable. That's pretty awesome. So as I said, we're going to be making this out of pink foam, XPS insulation foam, and the goal here, what I'm doing right now, is to use as much of this material as possible. Now that's quite a lot of volume for foam. Basically because it's big, long triangle, we're going to be kind of wasting a bit of it trying to make the tip sections just because it's going to be shaved off. So the goal here is to use as much of that as possible. I'm going to be cutting these triangles out, and we're going to end up with a few perfect isosceles triangles, which we can lay down in layers and make the foam lance. However, there's the edge pieces of the foam sheet that we can also still use because each edge combines to be one full triangle that we can use. Now, it's not going to be as structurally sound as a complete layer made of one piece. However, if we layer it underneath, it will be just fine, kind of in the way you would lay bricks, where you offset the place where they where the line is, where they don't touch. So the idea here is to combine a half piece with a whole piece to make a more structurally sound overall section. Yes. We're also cutting these down before we even glue them to the desired shape, because we are seeking to keep as much sanding down as possible. We don't want to sand because we don't want the particulates in the air. Also, it's a huge waste of time. It's much easier to cut a diagonal, as long as you're aware of what that diagonal should be, to get the correct shape. That's also why you saw me working with the graph paper in the beginning. It helps me kind of figure out in the relative thickness of 2 inches what the size and length and shape should be for the lances. A bit of drafting beforehand does save a bit of work, even if I'm not going to use it as a one-to-one pattern. So here we have the PVC pipe, which we're going to be using for the handle. There's going to be a main section and there are 2 side sections. We're going to be attaching them via the regular connector you can find at any home improvement store there for a 1/2-inch pipe. And the trick here for mounting them is we're going to create an anchor. So you've seen me cut tabs in PVC pipe and fold them over and then glue them on to, say, a piece of MDF or something like that, or screw them on for a nice strong anchor. So what I'm doing here is I'm folding those tabs out so that when we then glue the 2 halves of the lance together, of the lance tip I should say, they will catch on the foam and will not allow you to pull it apart because it's just being blocked by foam. We're gonna fill that cavity that we're making, because I didn't make exactly a perfect cavity, with a bit of plaster of Paris so it's nice and thick. And I do believe I'm mixing it with another material to give it a little bit more thickness. Okay, so now we have the anchor mounted, it's dried, and we're ready to work and make basically a cone. And this is where that planer really comes into play. It's going to be super nice. Again, we're going to start with the saw to get a basic shape going, because it's going to save us a ton of time, and it's going to keep all that stuff out of the air, or at least more of it out of the air. But the planer here can run along the entire edge and pull up any kind of imperfections relatively easily. Also, it's a much bigger sanding surface. The rasp is smaller and would just generally take more time overall. So this is the next step up. I'm really reluctant to use something like, say, a power sander, because the foam is so soft. I've just totally ripped through foam in an instant. So if you have that kind of control with foam and a sander, by all means try, but it's really, really risky. Here you can take your time and get the work done, and get a nice even coat. And that is kind of the trick at the end of the day, is making that perfect cone shape even throughout. It can be fairly easy to dig too deep and end up with like a divot in the cone, and it's really, really noticeable when you do that, just because there's no edge that's not going to be in profile with this perfect, with this cylinder, or cone. It's not a cylinder. So another thing you'll see me doing is sanding on an angle. This is to round it out over the profile of the lance rather than along the profile. How do I mean? What am I talking about? It keeps, when you're making a rounded shape, I find it beneficial to sand diagonally to more evenly get a smooth surface along the edge where people will see it. Whereas if you sand it perpendicular to the profile, you can dig in really deep, or if you sand parallel, you can end up creating a divot in one particular spot rather than over the entire surface. So we are of course going to be going in with a sanding sponge, evening out that surface, but we have the classic layer cake, and you can very clearly see it here, especially since we've got that PVC pipe down at the base where we've mounted the anchor. So this is definitely where we're going to try and hide this as much as possible. So simple plaster Paris, we're seeking to fill in these gaps. Now the trick with plaster Paris for me is to go in with a sponge brush, or in this case just a regular brush, doesn't matter, and get a light coating over the entire surface. Once it starts setting and becoming thicker and less manageable, then I go in and fill the cracks. That's because it gives me more work time with the plaster of Paris. If I start off with a big thick cup of plaster of Paris, I really have not a lot of time to work with it, and I don't have the option of covering up some of the smaller imperfections. So as I'm working, I'm identifying where the bigger issues are, and I'm just going to wait for when the time is right, when the plaster Paris is in the right consistency, and then coat it afterwards. And we're going to do both of the lance tips in the same way, and we're also going to be coating it in gesso. As you can see, I did make a bit of a dome on the back end. You see it's rounded where it's attached to the pipe. I don't think I showed that off, but it's as simple as just going in along the edge and rounding it a bit around. It's not any more complicated than trying to make a nice, clean, even cone. Now, if you have any dips, you can see here on the left spike, there's a bit of a dip. That's where I cut in too deep. That's where I'm going to come in later with some heavier plaster Paris and try and smooth out that curve so it's more uniform. And again, I don't know how much we can prevent, but practice makes perfect. And in this case, filling in all these gaps is going to be a couple layers of plaster Paris. No need to worry about getting on the first shot. Again, the same thing that applies to, say, paint, where you take your time. It applies here because you're going to end up sanding it all down later. It's easier to sand the thinner washes of plaster Paris over the thicker, bulky stuff that you might rush. Be like, oh, I got to use this plaster Paris. No, you really don't need to use all the plaster Paris. It's really, really cheap. It's fine. A whole bucket for me, like a gallon bucket's like $10. Not a huge deal. It'll last me a few projects, and it'll be just fine. Here, I've saved you guys trouble of sanding on camera because it's just me going in with the sanding sponge and cleaning that up. We are sanding the PVC pipe there just to give it a good texture to paint, and we're going to go over the piece in white acrylic paint and gesso. I think I've already gone over the entire piece in gesso. Is this gesso? But that is, yeah, it's just white acrylic paint. Again, you might just want to leave it as plaster Paris and gesso, but the acrylic paint does add a bit of protection in binding the gesso to the surface. It's kind of funny, but it does. The same thing is true with the varnish. Varnish, in the same way, does provide some protection. You see a little end cap there that I'm using on the tips of the spikes. Those are just there so I can dry it without damaging the surface on the bottom, that curved space we put there. And that's basically it for the lances. Very, very simple. The trick is, of course, getting a uniform, even cone shape, which is not as easy as it looks. Alright, I hope you guys enjoy. Check out the mask in the next video at finalcosmiccore.com. Good times to all. Hurrah! If you like this video, we have a matching video on finalcosmiccore.com. Click the link in the description to check it out.